Okay, for our second last presentation, we have Brooke Southgate and Melissa Montanari. And their presentation is going to be called Co-Designing Ethical AI Practices, Building a Framework for Responsible Use in Online Learning Design and Development. So I'll let them take it away.
Awesome. Hello, it's great to be here today with all of you. Our presentation will share some of the practical challenges and implications of trying to establish an ethical or at least responsible AI use framework for a team that has complex and conflicting priorities within a post-secondary institution. As I'm sure a lot of you can relate, we have a lot more questions than answers, and we're hoping to get feedback from all of you here today. So keep that in mind. Before expanding on that in more detail, a moment for introductions. So we are Melissa and Brooke. I'm Melissa Montanari. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a digital learning quality assurance specialist in the School of Continuing Studies at the University of Guelph. I work closely with distance education instructors to prepare the reoffering of for-credit and non-credit courses. My portfolio is mostly non-credit courses. So this means that many of the instructors that I'm working with are industry professionals rather than academics, which definitely shapes the kinds of conversations that I end up having about AI and specifically AI in education. I also have an academic background in English and cultural studies with a focus on food studies, and my thinking about AI is informed by the history of industrialized food production in the early 20th century, particularly how shifts in labor, technology, and systemic inequities intersect. And these dynamics have been kind of shaping my approach to the ethical implications of AI. Just for context.
My name is Brooke. I'm the digital learning coordinator. I work on the same team as Melissa at the School of Continuing Studies. So I usually source resources for course development. So sourcing images, working with the library for course reserves, things like that. We're going to talk about copyright and how everyone here has probably violated it. So yeah, that's inspired a lot of my input on this talk. But my background is English and popular culture, specifically eco-critical lens on science fiction, which I'm sure you can imagine has also influenced my approach to advancing technology and the environmental impact it has.
So today we're going to be sharing our work in progress on the ethical use of AI framework that our unit is building. This framework is a collaborative effort between two small teams in the School of Continuing Studies, the Digital Learning Design and Innovation team, which we're both a part of, and the Media and Educational Technology team, our web team essentially. Importantly, we're not AI experts. We're teaching and learning people who work to support the design, development, and delivery of specifically distance education courses across the University of Guelph and Guelph Humber. We also support micro-credentials for business partners, as well as continuing studies or continuing education non-credit DE courses. So this is just to say that we're servicing a wide range of learners and clients with very different needs and interests. It also means that we have a unique and complicated relationship to the university. We are beholden to the university for certain things and business clients for others, which causes some friction. As a group, we are participating in more university-wide conversations about the ethical implications of AI use, and many of us have serious concerns. But at the same time, in our everyday work, we are faced with the reality that AI is being used, which is a tricky place to be. But our response so far has been to share thoughtful and practical recommendations where possible. Our framework for responsible use of AI in course development is an extension of those kinds of recommendations that we've already been providing and those conversations that we've already been having with instructors. And the hope is that it can continue to be built upon as we learn more and as tools and policies change. We also hope it can inform approaches to AI by other teams in the School of Continuing Studies, our marketing team, for example. So I'll highlight some of the specific points of tension that really led us to begin building this framework. The first is increase in low quality AI generated submissions from our course authors. Second is leadership's interest in AI as an optimizational tool. Third, uncertainty about expectations around staff use of AI. And fourth, a lack of coherent institutional wide policy for AI use, which Brooke will cover in a little bit more detail.
So in terms of policies and frameworks from the university, there's not much, is what we learned. So the university has recognized that AI is a powerful tool and that the unauthorized use of AI threatens academic integrity. And it does violate misconduct policies, like they've come out on that. However, instructors are left to determine what forms of AI to use in their courses, and students then must follow these expectations. However, they definitely emphasize instructor-led courses and in-person courses, whereas we work in distance education. So there are like the push for in-person exams and assignments. We can't do that. Well, we shouldn't do that.
Always do
Yeah.
that.
So within the university, there have been individual units like the Office of Teaching and Learning and IT who have come out with more specific recommendations. But again, these aren't policies, they're just, you should do this. So the Office of Teaching and Learning supports the idea that it's up to each individual instructor to decide if they want to implement AI, either in the design or in the course itself, so as part of assessments and course use. And then how students should also use it. And there is an effort to increase instructor AI literacy to help them make these choices. But as I'm sure many of you know, instructor engagement and capacity is a challenge of let's learn a whole new technology. So while instructors are encouraged to take accountability and disclose AI use, there's no information about how to actually do that and what that looks like. Alternatively, instructors who discourage or prohibit AI can actually take a very punitive approach and AI proof their assignments. So that is also an equity concern and a challenge. This instructor-led approach to AI also encourages that any materials produced with Gen AI be reviewed and fact-checked. That would be great. But there's no guidelines on how to do that or what that looks like. IT has provided some additional guidelines. These focus more on data security and privacy, as I'm sure you can imagine. Don't enter personal data into an AI system. Similar to OTL's guidelines, IT recommends reviewing what has come out and checking, and they actually specifically do say to look to see if it is the same as copyrighted materials. However, they also say to read the terms of use, which would be great. And this would also help with things like who owns content, which is something that we're going to talk about. Just because you put a prompt into AI, that output doesn't necessarily belong to you. So these recommendations outline a little of the direction that we're getting and some of the questions that we have and why we've really come about of how do we as a team approach these things. So one of the big things is like, how do we advise instructors on how to disclose their AI use? How are we expecting our team members to disclose AI use? And then because we work collaboratively, whose responsibility is it when it comes to advising these instructors and students on their courses?
Now, to discuss our working group and the process that we took to build this framework. So as a unit, we decided to approach the question of what do we do about AI by forming a working group. From there, our working group decided to develop the framework for AI use in course development. And the draft of this framework was shown to leadership who provided input and direction for next steps. What began as a challenge to build an ethical framework for AI use in a complex environment has come to be more of a conversation about building a framework for responsible use of AI, specifically in the design, development, and delivery of our courses. The reason is within the context and constraints that we're operating from, it's not really possible for us to mandate ethical AI use. We don't have the authority to do that. And more importantly, we have folks in our unit and in our working group who have very different roles, different relationships to AI, different concerns regarding AI, and different ideas of what it means to be ethical in general, but specifically when it comes to the use of this technology. So our shift to responsibility refocuses our framework not on mandating use, but on the reality that there are ethical implications to the decisions that we're making. In other words, our hope is to re-emphasize that we, the people who are involved in decision making surrounding AI use in our department, are responsible for grappling with the ethical implications of those decisions. That's not to say that there are not clearly unethical uses of this technology that won't be entertained within the department, but whether or not there are ethical uses is a lot less clear, and we want to leave space to have those kinds of conversations.
So the core of our framework is that AI use in course design, development, and delivery be human-centered. There's been other mentions of the human in the loop. We're really driving that home. So we want to emphasize the importance of there being the human in the loop and that all AI use have significant human oversight. What this means specifically will depend on the tools used and how they are being used, but we want to frame AI as a tool that is used or not used by a human, and that AI's outputs must be accounted for by a human. So the quote we have up here is by Emma Aiken-Clark, who was writing for the University of Toronto, and says that human-centered AI prioritizes human agency, relationships, context, and values. It actively aims to amplify human potential by supporting collaboration, creativity, learning, and well-being through AI tools that are meaningfully aligned with how people think, feel, and work. So one of the principles that stood out from Aiken-Clark's article was a focus on the people who are implicated by AI rather than the system or process that we want to improve. So for example, whether we choose to use an LLM to support our work in the moment may be influenced by how that Gen AI content impacts the student experience when they take the course that we're working on.
So I'm gonna provide an overview of the core pillars. So the working group agreed to focus our framework on 6 pillars of responsible AI use, and we'll be considering these pillars through 3 distinct lenses: the builders, the facilitators, and the learners. Today, we're mostly talking about the lens of the builders because that's the perspective that we are most heavily involved in. And the pillars that we have right now are responsible use and accountability, intellectual property, ownership and copyright, transparency and disclosure, privacy and data security, equity and accessibility, and sustainability and intentionality. Now, we'll provide a brief snapshot of where we are in our thinking regarding each pillar and some of the challenges that we're anticipating. As you'll notice, there's some overlap among these pillars. They have a lot of similar concerns that relate to one another. So first is responsible use and accountability. That's a big concern for the working group. In our day-to-day roles, many of us are working with course authors and instructors to build and update courses. Increasingly, we're seeing course authors submit AI-generated material to our instructional designers. And like Brooke already mentioned this, but I want to acknowledge that it's very possible that this is due to really serious constraints that are being placed on their time as funding for TAs and other supports are being cut. This is definitely a broader systemic issue than it is simply an issue about AI adoption, and that's important to recognize. At the same time, as a unit, we think it's very important to determine and communicate who is responsible for the quality of content created with generative AI, as well as the impact that that content then has on the learner. In discussing these topics, we've been considering the following questions. Should the subject matter expert or course author be required to verify the AI-generated material, that AI-generated material is correct, aligns with disciplinary standard, and meets the needs of the course or the learning outcomes of the course? Or does that responsibility fall to the digital learning specialist who works with the content during course development? For instance, if a course author uses generative AI to produce written material for a unit, are they accountable for the accuracy and appropriateness of that output? Likewise, if a digital learning specialist uses AI to edit, clean up, or expand content received from an author, are they then responsible for the resulting text, or should the final version always go back to the author for verification? So these are kind of like process questions that we've been thinking about. At the moment, our position is that responsibility should rest with the person using AI. In this example, it would be the course author as the subject matter expert who needs to be the human in the loop. However, this solution raises more questions. Are these expectations enforced? How would that impact academic freedom? What would enforcement look like without a robust institutional policy? Beyond disclosure, which we will talk about shortly, what does responsibility or accountability actually look like in practice when it comes to this kind of AI use? And hugely important also, how do we repair trust with students if it is broken because of AI use related to one of the courses that we support?
So when it comes to copyright, there's the obvious legal guidelines. Don't put copyrighted materials into an AI, please. Um, However, you'll read about how AI can be so useful for things to summarize journal articles or create assessment questions based on a textbook. Don't do it. Please don't. Even closed systems, bad. However, this gets even more complicated when we talk about your intellectual property. Can a course author put their IP into a Gen AI tool? For example, to create assessment questions based on the content they wrote. Can a developer put someone else's IP into a Gen AI tool, for example, to have it correct the grammar? And going a step further, is the content created by AI even owned by that person? So that's one of the big questions we're having right now. Canada has not had any legal cases about this yet. There are a couple pending in the States, and we're pretty much waiting for the States to make a decision before Canada steps up. The US Copyright Office has stated that human authorship is required for copyright protection. Thus, a Gen AI output left as is not protected. However, human interaction with that output can lead to it then being protected. This focus on human authorship and interaction with AI supports our ideas of human-centered AI use. It's not enough to write a prompt and plop the output into course content. This does go for images too. Active, engaged human review and input is required in order for it to be a copyrightable IP. As far as transparency and disclosure, the University of Guelph has provided the vague guidance that we talked about earlier, that it should be disclosed, but no specifics on how to do that. So does every instance of AI use, like each page in a unit, need to have a disclosure? Or can we just put it in the outline or just at the introduction that AI was used in the course creation? And then what the policies don't address is the impact that such disclosure will have. Will students view a course differently if they see that the content was created with AI? Will it impact the school's trust with students to have it known that AI was used in the creation? And will the disclosure implicitly invite students to use AI in their work? So the aforementioned study by Social Media Lab found that people were split about Gen AI. We didn't put the numbers up there. About 39% of Canadians had a positive view of AI use. About 34% had negative, and 27% were neutral. So based on this data, the number of people who might appreciate AI use could be about the same as those who would view it negatively. However, students in a course are very different than general adult Canadians in a survey. So we don't have actual information about how our course content would be viewed. All right, so privacy and data security. This is also one where we do have guidance from the university that aligns with basic common sense practices. Don't enter personal information, your own or anyone else's. Review the tool's permissions and data handling policies, and to opt out where possible for allowing prompts or outputs to be used for training. 72% of Canadians, this is back to that other survey, have concerns about security and privacy when it comes to Gen AI use. So it is very important that we have clear policies about this specifically. significant privacy and security concerns arise with marking student work in AI and how to handle student communications, even when the AI tool is institutionally approved. So while course content creation tends to raise fewer privacy concerns, it still intersects with the issues of copyright and intellectual property, particularly when AI is incorporated into course content. So this also leads to broader concerns for our units. Are we expected to communicate data security considerations to instructors? And if so, what is the scope of that responsibility? Is there anything we can do to protect students' information and IP other than just recommending not to do that? So these questions highlight the need for clearer institutional policy and clearer boundaries around how, when, and why AI tools should be used in academics contexts.
The next pillar is equity and accessibility. So the University of Guelph has expressed commitments to equity, diversity, and inclusion. And at the same time, Gen AI frequently reproduces and amplifies biases present in training data. That's something that we've heard a couple of times today. This raises a critical question. Who is responsible for reviewing AI-generated content for bias and ensuring it aligns with university and departmental expectations, especially when those same systemic biases are reflected in institutional structures, including hiring practices, among others? Equity concerns also arise when students are encouraged or required to use AI in courses and assessments. If we work with instructors to design assignments under the assumption that AI will be used, or because an instructor insists upon it, how will the decision potentially disenfranchise students who do not consent to using AI or having their work put into AI by a third person for whatever reason? This is a question that comes up a lot when it comes to AI grading, which is a conversation that has been going around. So like how do students consent to that? Some probably won't. And are they free to do that? Additionally, AI tools vary widely in sophistication, accuracy, and cost. More advanced models are typically more expensive and harder to detect. This can also give students who are financially resourced an even greater advantage than they already might have. Even in assignments where AI use is prohibited, students with access to higher quality tools may be less likely to get caught if they do use AI. So such discrepancies enhance existing inequities across the student body. And the final pillar, sustainability and intentionality. We've seen firsthand how quickly AI technologies change, which raises concerns about the sustainability of the tools that we do integrate. Within our current model of course development and delivery, we don't have the capacity to review or optimize course content and assessments on an annual basis. Currently, we intend to operate from the belief that it's neither pedagogically sound or responsible to build entire courses or assessment structures around AI. It's also not pedagogically sound or responsible to completely overhaul well-designed courses retroactively in response to AI anxiety. I see this a lot with instructors in my role. They're very quick to jump to redesigning assessments, even if there's no data to support the idea that students are using AI to complete the assessments. It's tricky sometimes to get a sense of whether they're not, but we have like some data points that don't show very much of a difference from courses that were offered in 2020 in terms of engagement and online courses that are offered now in terms of engagement. We know that some students are definitely using AI. There are always going to be students who find ways to cheat. But our focus as a unit should be to design meaningful and engaging learning opportunities that reduce barriers for learners, not to police our learners. Our priority is to ensure that any AI tool or technology is integrated intentionally and only when it clearly supports pedagogical goals. With this, we must also consider whether a tool will remain affordable and accessible to students and instructors over time, as this directly affects course maintenance and future offering, which is important to our model, our service model.
So the question is, what's next? Our framework is still being developed. We have largely accepted that the ethical framework is beyond us, and that's why we're kind of shifting focus to responsible use. And we're also focusing more on the builders, which is our team specifically, rather than all university, or even within all of School of Continuing Studies. To make this more manageable, our working group has split into smaller groups to focus each on 3 pillars. And then both of those groups have met at least once. So one, which is my group, has opted into pairs to tackle 1 pillar each. No surprise, I'm doing copyright. The other group, which Melissa is in, has met twice, and they are proceeding to gather more information and the existing guidelines to help support what direction we should go in. But as you can see, it's still very much a work in progress. Our overall focus has shifted significantly, so we're redeveloping our ideas within this context to provide guidelines for those who are interested in using Gen AI in the course development, while also acknowledging the complications that arise from doing so. References matter. So thank you.
But we can take some questions.
So I'm the 34% for conflict against AI, but I have questions about, you mentioned copyright implicit.
Mhm.
So I'm assuming by closest you mean like just a bespoke large language model that I have on my computer.
Uses Copilot, and that's considered a close. And once you close that window, that your information is gone.
I see. So what is the harm of using copyright material in those systems?
Because you don't know what will be used in the future. So if it stores it and says, well, we're not going to use it now, they might use it in 5 years.
Right. Okay.
And that's the do we trust corporations?
Absolutely not. Yeah.
Regarding that, is there ways to enforce data retention policies for these companies?
Not at the moment, and not by us. Like that would definitely be a government legislation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, one of the reasons why we're like trying to build this framework. Because as we've done research, like we're finding even like within the university that there is not a lot of policy in place to help assist the way that we're operating and like the advice that we're giving instructors. Like we don't have much to fall back on at the moment, which is like a scary place to be.
It's the Wild West.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I have 2 different questions. I'll just take one for them. So this relates back to something that we're talking about during the panel, right? So again, with online courses and things like that, ideally, again, the gold standard would be that you could have a sort of one-on-one kind of role defense, right? And it's interesting because AI can permit that to a degree. I mean, you don't even necessarily need the most sophisticated LLM to do this, right? You can build your own.
Yeah.
And on top of that, you can build it in such a way that you can even monitor students while they're doing it. So you can actually make sure they're typing in everything and not just sort of copying and pasting and stuff like that. So, and even then it's, you can still have a human grade the conversation, not have the AI do it. The AI is just questioning them and asking follow-up questions and all that kind of stuff. So do you see that there's a potential role for using AI in situations like that?
I have a response to that. I've seen it used in really interesting ways, even where the student is encouraged to teach the chatbot. The problem, I think, with that in our model is we are encouraged to produce courses that can just roll over and over and over again. And sometimes a new instructor gets hired and they're not familiar with the kind of technology. And we're not the ones who do the hiring. We're not the ones who are able to do the training. So a challenge, I think, in terms of like the sustainability of something like that is there the literacy for that right now, especially in the continuing in the continuing education process that I support, there isn't. We're finding that we're having to do a lot of educating around AI use, and we are not able to guide instructors or offer support to instructors who don't already have that skill set, which is a challenge. And then on the DE side of things for the university, like for undergraduate courses, that still requires a lot of instructor oversight. And we're seeing oftentimes if we've really thoughtfully designed a DE course with an instructor, we were told that the course is going to have 100 students. The next time that course is offered, they've increased the cap to 1,000 students. And so there isn't enough instructor support to monitor those kinds of interactions. And also there's not enough TA support to monitor those too. So in theory, like, yeah, like that could be a great solution, but systemically, I don't think right now we have the infrastructure to support it.
I wonder if, again, this kind of ties back to what we've been talking about all day, right?
Yeah.
Universities kind of need to rethink things, right? Like, stop emphasizing the final product, the paper, right, or whatever they're making, and more like, can you demonstrate the skills that you've put into this? And so, again, I wonder if there's more value, particularly if we're trying to get away from things like grade inflation and stuff like that. If we could just sort of make this wholesale switch. And again, like, I'm not talking about replacing humans with AI. I'm just talking about trying to be a bit more creative with AI and to lighten the load and actually allow you for students to show off the skills that they've developed, right?
I think the challenge that we're attuned to and discuss is once AI is on the table, sometimes it seems like leadership is like, oh, there's an opportunity to optimize without actually engaging in like the kind of creative thinking that I think would really benefit students. It's kind of like, okay, AI is just like an efficiency tool, and that's how it's being kind of perceived, and that's how it's sort of, we feel like we're kind of pushing against that, or running into that.
Well, I'm definitely pushing against it. I'm also a 34%. So my counter to the like using a chatbot is the last thing on earth we need to do is encourage young people to use artificial means of engagement when you're not going to talk to people. Like the university experience is about meeting people and making those connections on so many levels. And especially distance education students, if they're not on campus, if they're not engaging in those things, we want them to talk to a person. Solution is hiring TAs. But we also, I know that's not a viable solution, but it is the solution.
Invest in labor.
Yeah.
I think we're out of time.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, we're towards the end of the day, and ours is the last talk. I'm not like super one question. I want to push back on whether or not you're talking about an ethical framework. And then you say, we're not talking about ethical framework, but we need to be responsible. We need to make sure we don't abide by property rights. So whether you like the sound of being ethical, I'm going to push back on that because there definitely is that element and touch on that. And you're kind of implying what we should do within our constraints. We should act according to the boundaries in which we're actually supposed to, dealing with the angels of the world kind of thing. So you are doing that. One thing, I work at Conestoga, so as a computer scientist. So a lot of the things, first of all, to say that it's very clear that AI is going to be used in the industry. And there's a lot of problems with that, kind of just practically. And also there's the skills element of like, how do you work with an AI? And if you're working with an AI kind of as a co-pilot, if you start with spaghetti, you end up with multi-dimensional spaghetti. So for my concern, the ethical concern is really how are the professors modeling
the behavior in terms of an actual piece. And in my view, if we want to say we live with our constraints, well, that means we have to say no. We have to say absolutely 100%, and we have to say everything in between. It's not, there's tech files over here, there's Luddites over here, and we're somewhere slightly in the middle. I actually think we need to kind of think the full spectrum of options and think of it in terms of what is the behavior that we're modeling while we're using other models that have already been preset. And so things like when we say critical thinking, and I just run a course through an AI, what's the model, right? Oh, everybody start critically thinking, but here I built this course from an AI model. So to me, that what's missing from that piece, and potentially because you pulled away from ethically, how are we going to model as professors the behavior that we think the students of the future are going to be? And we need to speak about that. Fine. And so actually, how do we model? And how does your framework support that? How we are going?
I think our, like, as designers, we are currently like having those conversations with instructors and trying to emphasize the importance of modeling for students, like what critical thinking looks like. What does good writing look like? I think the challenge that, and you pull this out, and we talk like we're kind of working with the constraints. The folks who are involved in the working group, we don't do the hiring. We're like, I wish we could be like, no, this is slop, take it back. Like, let's have a let's spend a lot of time revising this module so that it benefits students. Sometimes we don't have instructor engagement. Even when we're trying to, we've got resources that we send along. We have meeting times with the to try and have these conversations, and sometimes we still don't have the engagement, and then it becomes an issue of like this course isn't going to get delivered, and if there's no course, the students are going to suffer. So we often get kind of caught in this strange place in the middle, which I don't think it answers your question, but I think it maybe teases out some of the challenges of like working within the context of a university, where, and I think we were talking about this before, where the responsibility kind of gets fractured in ways that aren't necessarily the most helpful. So I don't have an answer, and I wish I did, but it's definitely something that I think everyone in our unit is thinking about and trying to figure ways to address. Or I don't know if you want to add anything.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's one of the reasons we're pushing for the course author as responsible. That's in part, a good part of my job is copy editing AI block that we receive.
Right.
And it is so obvious. It's all sentences that are just the three things. Sometimes it's list of three things within list of three things sentences. So we want to be able to go back and say, fix it. Like, this is on you. To get that human voice, to have that human touch and that creativity come across. And that goes back to what we were saying, if students go, listen, obviously AI, why would I not just use AI with that assessment? So we very much do want that human visibility, that human who's actually creating and having that touch.
I will say, we are hoping that this framework is going to be like guiding hiring practices also, so that there's at least like more opportunity for us to like have conversations with instructors and like ensure that there is like a shared understanding of responsibility too, but we're not at that stage yet. I think.